Module 1, we will focus on real estate market analysis. You know, it makes a big difference where you invest, not just the type of property, but the actual city. And when I talk about markets, I'm mostly talking about cities and neighborhoods within those cities. Okay, market analysis is critically important to your success as a real estate investor because most properties follow along the trend of any given city or market area. This means that selecting the right investment market will increase your chances of success dramatically, while a poor market choice will definitely decrease them, and we don't want that to happen. There are several important fundamentals of selecting quality real estate investment markets. In this module, you'll learn the types of markets and, most importantly, how to pick the right places to invest. What is a linear market and how to find that market? What is a cyclical market? How to find that market? And what is a hybrid market? That's obviously sort of a hybrid between the two, right? The importance of cash flow and the power of appreciation and something I call regression to replacement cost. And we'll also learn about credit-based appreciation and how to spot a market headed for a downturn. And let me just give you a clue on that one. You'll learn more coming up. But we're going to do something called the RV ratio that's going to give you a big clue to that. Well, congratulations on taking this course. Real estate investing is the most historically proven asset class in America, if not the entire world. So I really want to just first congratulate you on taking this step. Tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people have created significant wealth with income property, and you can do it too. It's really quite simple when you understand some of the basic principles. So first of all, it is a big world and it is a big country. And of course, when I say country, I'm referring to the US. As we look at where should we invest, the geography is fundamentally important. There's an old saying in real estate that all real estate is local. All real estate is local. And I believe that is very true. Now, when we look at different markets around the world or around the country, pretty much the same concepts apply no matter where you go. One is that there are three basic types of markets. One is called a linear market, the other is called a cyclical market, and the other is a combination of the two. I call that a hybrid market. Now, why is this important? Because, you know, for many years, I was living in Southern California pretty much all of my life and just moved to Arizona fairly recently, about 4 years ago. And I was always quote, investing, unquote, in the very expensive Southern California real estate market. But you know what? I finally realized that I wasn't really an investor. I was more of a speculator or a gambler. And what I want to teach you about in this course is the proven, conservative, prudent approach to investing. As we age, we usually become a little bit more conservative with our money. You know, we've gone through some trials and tribulations, we've made some bad deals probably over the years, and we don't like to lose money. One of the things I want to impart to you is how to keep yourself from making the mistakes I have made and that I've seen so many of my clients make over the years. What that leads to is investing for cash flow. You know, I have this thing I call the 10 Commandments of Successful Investing, and it's sort of my core content that I talk about. And commandment number 5 is thou shalt not gamble. And so when you talk about real estate, when you talk about income property, what does gambling mean? What does speculating mean versus investing? Well, to me, it means that when you are an investor, you look for income, you look for cash flow, you look for mailbox money, you look for something reliable. Rather than betting on appreciation, hey, if appreciation or capital gains come, I can spend them just as well as the next guy. But that's what we want to really consider the icing on the cake. We want to consider cash flow the fundamental product of a good investment. When you look at linear markets, those tend to produce very good cash flow. When you look at cyclical markets, those tend to be the markets where people look to appreciation because the cash flow usually stinks in those markets. So we're going to differentiate in the next couple of lessons the difference between linear, cyclical, and hybrid markets and how we can tailor our investment strategy to each of these markets. So on my screen here, you'll see that I have a website you've probably heard of, Zillow. Zillow is right on my screen for you. The reason I have the Zillow website is because there are some fantastic research tools here. I'm just here at the front page because I want you to know how to find this so you can do your own research. And remember, part of our badge assignment will be to identify these different kind of markets over the next couple of lessons. When we go to the Zillow.com website and we click on More right here on the front page, and then we click down here under Zillow Research, we can find some really good stuff, and it's all free and it's all available to all of us. Down here, as I'm scrolling down the screen, you see these real estate market snapshots. Well, these are very handy. So first of all, let's look at the United States, because we've got to get an overview of what the country looks like so we can compare it to some linear, cyclical, and hybrid markets. So when we look at the country, we see that the Zillow Home Value Index is showing 178,700. And for speed here in these lessons, I'm going to just kind of round off, okay? So let's call it $179,000. And the year-over-year change in that number is 4.9% appreciation that we've had over the past year. And the rent index is $1,355, and the year-over-year changes, rents are up by 3.4%. So that's what the country's doing overall. So that's kind of our baseline. That's our reference point. But remember, the country is unequally weighted because you've got cyclical, hybrid, and linear markets, and they're not equally weighted. So let's kind of drill down a little bit and let's look at some markets that I would recommend for investors. And, in the next couple of lessons, we'll look at markets I wouldn't recommend for investors as well. As we go through this, we can find some really interesting stuff. Let's look at a market that I've done a lot of business in and I really like, and that is Atlanta, Georgia. So that'll be the first one because this is an alphabetical list. So there we see that the price index says that Atlanta, Georgia is 154,900. The Zillow index is not to be confused with the one you usually hear about on the news, known as the Case-Shiller Index. I'm not a big fan of the Case-Shiller Index for several reasons, but the biggest reason of which is that it only profiles 20 markets. And those 20 markets that it profiles are big metropolitan areas, and about 14 or 15 of them are cyclical markets. They're the markets you hear about on the news most of the time, but they're not necessarily the right places to invest. So I like looking at this tool better than looking at Case-Shiller. So here we see 154.9, so we'll call it 155, and the year-over-year change is that the prices are up by a whopping 10% in Atlanta, Georgia. That's awesome. That's really good appreciation. We see that the rent index shows that it's $1,238. We'll just call it $1,240, and the rents are up by 4.5%. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty darn good. One of the things we're going to talk about throughout this course is the power of leverage when it comes to income property. And with that power of leverage, I want to just point something out here before we go on and we look at some other markets. You see how the prices were up by 10% year over year in Atlanta? That's unusually high appreciation, by the way. And part of the reason for that is that a lot of the institutional investors came into the Atlanta market and pushed up the prices. These are the hedge funds, the private equity groups. If you bought an investment property in Atlanta 1 year ago, and this example is oversimplified, okay, there's a little more to it than I'm talking about here, but if you bought a property in Atlanta a year ago and you put 20% down, which you might do for an investment property, and you got 10% appreciation, note that your leverage ratio is a 5-to-1 leverage ratio. So you own the property and get all the benefits of ownership by only putting 1/5 of the money into the deal. And that means your year-over-year appreciation of 10% with leverage, if you can get that bank financing, and we'll talk about that more later on in the course, if you can get that bank financing, you can multiply this appreciation number by what? By a 5-to-1 ratio. So that 10% turns into 50%. So your overall return on investment is dramatically magnified. This is one of the many wonderful benefits of income property. Another thing I want you to notice here in this linear market, by the way, Atlanta is an example of a linear market. Notice that the rent here compared to the sales price is pretty darn good. What we ideally look for is an RV ratio or a rent to value ratio of 1%. So if you were to pay $150,000 for a property, I'd like you to get $1,500 per month in income. Now, Atlanta is doing that in the lower price properties within that city. So if you buy a $120,000 property or a $100,000 property in Atlanta, most of the time you can get $1,000 or $1,200 per month, respectively, 1% of the price. Let's just look at another market here. Gosh, where do we want to go? Well, we're not going to go there because that's not a good example of a linear market. I was going to take you to, let's see, where do I want to go? See, it's such a big country. There's so much to choose from all the time. Boy, all of these markets, it's funny, I talk about them all the time because some serve as a great example and some serve as a terrible example. Let's look at Indianapolis. This is kind of an interesting one, okay? Over the years, the past 11 years, I've done lots of business in Indianapolis. And here we've got a 129 price index price. We've got appreciation being down a little bit, ever so slightly. It's almost even. And remember, there are many things that knock these statistics off, okay? In terms of new home construction, because if they're building lower priced homes versus more expensive homes, that will skew the stats and so forth. If you've got these institutional investors in a market like you do in Atlanta, or maybe the institutional investors were in, for example, Indianapolis a year earlier, and then they came to Atlanta a year later, and they kind of skew the prices, okay? So, you know, that's a complicated subject in and of itself. But here's what I want you to notice about this linear, boring, and I'm saying boring in a good way, market like Atlanta or Indianapolis. I want you to notice the rents. Here, a 129 property, and your rent index is 1195 or 1200. So it's almost 1%. And your rents were up just over 1% in the past year, according to the index. And let's see if we can get one more example. How about, let's go to Little Rock, Arkansas, okay? Now, Little Rock is a market that I've just started doing business in for about the past year or so. So it's, I guess, still a fairly new market. But Arkansas, interestingly, is a very interesting state. One of the things I always want to look for as an investor is I want to look for landlord-friendly markets. Markets that are friendly to our cause as a landlord. We want markets where if the tenant doesn't pay the rent, they're going to kick them out as soon as possible so you can get a tenant that will pay the rent in that property, so you don't have what we call in the real estate business an alligator. An alligator is something that is always hungry and it's going to eat you. And in this case, an alligator is where you have a property that is not producing income, but you still need to make the mortgage payments and the property taxes and the insurance payments on the property every month. And so that's no fun. So Arkansas is the most landlord-friendly state in the country. Okay. Other very landlord-friendly states would be Texas. Georgia's pretty good. There are lots of them. Okay. And here's an interesting thing that you're also going to notice. Landlord-friendly states tend to be linear markets. So one more example here. 125,000 price index, 1.5% year-over-year appreciation, Nothing to brag about, obviously. And rent index of $1,006. And the rents are up by 3.5% in the past year. So here you see that you can pretty much almost get 1% of the value per month. But in Little Rock, I wouldn't even be buying a $125,000 house. And you'll notice that the lower the price of the property, the better the rent to value ratio. So there, if you bought a $100,000 property, it would rent for about $1,000 per month pretty nicely most of the time. And you have very good cash flow here. So your assignment for your badge is to go on Zillow and identify 3 linear markets. Okay? In a country as large and diverse as the United States, there's no such thing as a national real estate market. There are really about 400, that's right, 400 local markets. So go and earn your badge, identify 3 linear markets, and on the next lesson, we will be back and we will talk about some characteristics of cyclical markets.